Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. And welcome to the first PJRFSI webinar of 2021, Food Fraud and COVID Global Update. My name's Amy. I'm a member of the marketing team here at Perry Johnson Registrar's Food Safety, Inc., and I'll be facilitating today's webinar and offering technical support to our speakers. Today, we're very excited to be welcoming back a friend of the show, so to speak, John Spink of MSU for today's presentation, and I'll be introducing him to you all a little later on in the show. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping notes. To ensure audio quality, all attendees are on mute. However, we do absolutely want to take any questions you might have. So to ask a question, you can just go ahead and type it into the questions tab of the GoToWebinar control panel and click send. We'll answer as many of these as we have time for at the end of the prepared slides. The most frequent questions that we get are usually, where can I get the slides, or will a recording be available? And the answer to both of those questions is yes. The recording will be available from our YouTube channel. That can be linked to from our website at pjrfsi.com. And the slides will also be available for download from pjrfsi.com. So if you want to share those slides or the recording with someone who, expressed interest, or if you find value in the presentation and wanted to share it with your team, we absolutely encourage you to send the links or the files to your friends and family. This is just showing where you can open up that questions tab on the control panel. Go ahead and type your question in and send it off. And like I said, we'll answer as many as we have time for at the end. Before we get into business, I have a quick polling question for you all today, just to get an idea of who all is in the audience. And that question is your organization currently certified to a GFSI standard? So you can choose from any of the 4 options on your screen, just choose whatever fits you best. And once we get some participation, I will move right along and introduce our first speaker for the day. All right, we are getting a great amount of participation. Thank you all so very much. It's great to be back doing webinars in the new year. All right, we've got over 80%, so that's awesome. And it looks like a majority of you are certified, which is always great to see. And there's some people who are looking to become certified, which is also awesome. All right, I am going to go ahead now and introduce our first speaker, and that's Paul Demarin. Paul is the Senior Vice President of Food Safety and Supply Chain here at PJRFSI. He joined us last January and has over 35 years of experience in the hospitality, service, and retail agri-food sectors. Paul's a board member of the Ontario Food Safety Association, as well as an advisory council member with the George Washington University School of Business for their digital marketing certificate program. Before he came to PJRFSI, Paul worked for 16 years in the certification industry with clients in every sector from food safety and supply chain to brand protection and quality. Paul's also worked for many years in management system certification. And before that, Paul was a professional chef and a consultant for over 20 years. So Paul, I'm going to hand things over to you and let's get started.
Great, thank you very much, Amy. I really appreciate everyone being here with us today. Thank you so much for attending. Like Amy said, we're extremely excited to get back into the swing of our new webinar schedule. We have a very packed 5 months ahead of us, starting next week as well. I believe that we have 2 going every week with some of our industry's top experts across multiple industries and multiple topics. So please make sure to check that out at a later date. We have a lot to unpack here today, though, with Dr. John. So I'm going to start off, as always, with a short overview of PJRFSI, and then we'll go right into our feature presentation. So jumping right in here, some of you may be aware, we were originally founded as PJR or Perry Johnson Registrars in 1994. So really, we've been at the forefront of certification and registration since the very beginning. We achieved multiple accreditations over the year, but ANAB started it all after our creation in 1995. And then we expanded over the next 20 years internationally in many areas like Germany, Portugal, Spain, Canada, Thailand, Latin America, etc. We had also attained our UCAS accreditation during that time when we were expanding further into the UK and China. We're part of a family of companies, and in 2005, we started a new business, PJ&A, and that was founded as a healthcare technology company that does things like medical coding, telemedicine, virtual scribing services. We also had PJLA, which was founded in 1999. That's our laboratory accreditation business who accredits laboratories around the world. Shortly thereafter, in 2012, PJRFSI, who we represent, was born. And this was really because of a requirement in the industry, as you all know, for food safety certification, registration, and testing. We have offices all around the world and offer a wide range of certification programs, from social responsibility to organic, gluten-free, and all of the GFSI assessments. Excuse me. If you look at the last 9 years that we've been in this sector of the industry, we work today with all types of organizations, retailers, processors, distribution companies, exporters, importers, farms, you name it. And really our main goal is to help them with their food safety, supply chain quality, and brand protection requirements. Our entire team here is extremely committed to providing value added for our customers and their supply chain. And going back way back in my early days as a chef, there really is a difference between customer service and focus, and that's what we aim to achieve here and make sure that you understand that we understand that. We have about 460 auditors around the world, over 30 programs in our food bucket, if you will, and that's covering about 60 countries. The important thing is that our auditors understand not only the language of these countries, but equally important, the culture. We've had an outstanding client attrition rate of 1.7% over the last 5 years, which is truly outstanding. And we continually receive a rating from our clients of 9.5 out of 10. So the way that we have our services, and due to COVID-19 in 2020, the certification industry was deemed essential because it's based on the results of tests, inspection, and audits, and gives confidence to you and me as the consumer that the organizations we do business with are being evaluated against national and international standards by a competent group like ourselves. But again, I've said this 100 times, it's not business as usual. It wasn't in 2020, and it still isn't in 2021. We all need to continue to provide high quality services to our customers. We have to make sure we're doing it in a safe manner and doing our part to reduce COVID. In today's market, I believe that this is even more critical. The landscape continues to change daily, it seems. There's new recalls and regulations coming everywhere, and navigating the landscape, I think, really can be a challenge for all organizations of any scope or size. So today we define our services into 4 areas. We have auditing and certification for accredited third-party standards like GFSI or the ISO standards. We have second-party unaccredited auditing, so think of standards like GMP or GDP, some of our cannabis and hemp standards, social accountability, etc. We also do customer-specific work, where if you have either through your own facilities or that of your global supply chain have audit requirements that you want to implement to help protect your brand, then we certainly do that against a number of different standards. We also offer training solutions for that. So looking at our programs here, I won't talk a lot. As I mentioned, we do about 30 different programs on the food side of the house. There are many different types of audits in the industry. Some are accredited, some are unaccredited, some are government specific, some are retailer mandated. I talked a little bit about the first party programs where we're auditing against a customer's checklist, and the reasons typically that clients will utilize a group like PJRFSI or another CB is because we have technical knowledge of the standards, we have the location of the auditors, language requirements, we try and minimize cost to the business, through effectively managing the travel. These are all reasons that typically they would choose these types of organizations to partner with. We also are recognized as an accredited body to perform various government audits and inspections like FSMA, FSVP for the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, and VQIP for Voluntary Qualified Importer Program. And we're also a proud member and CB partner for the GRMA. So just looking here, and I'm almost finished and wrap it up, give it over to Dr. John. We've had a long-standing relationship with many accreditations and groups around the world that are recognized as either accreditation bodies or ABs or scheme owners. And accreditation, that really gives assurance to our customers that we operate under the rules of an accreditation body and the scheme owners, which helps to regulate our work and deliver the highest quality of work that we can. It's a large investment that's made every year by not only our CB, but I'm sure all other CBs as well. But it's certainly worth it because it gives customers confidence that they're partnering with a respected and recognized partner. So just to wrap it up for me then, I just wanted to thank you all again for joining us. It's been my great pleasure. I can't wait to share all of the other exciting webinars that we have coming up. You can find those. I think we'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the presentation here today. But hopefully, before not too long, we'll be able to all start seeing each other again in person. And if you ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out. So I'll pass back to you, Amy. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Paul. Just before I go ahead and introduce Dr. John Spink, I'm going to go ahead and throw you all another polling question. And that second question is, how confident are you that you're fully compliant with GFSI and FSMA/Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act requirements for food fraud prevention? That's a mouthful. Go ahead and just choose whichever option out of the 5 suits you best. And like I said before, once we get some participation, we'll move right along to introducing our keynote speaker for the day. For any of those out there who have joined us late and missed the introduction, welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us today. This session is being recorded and the slides will also be available for download from our website afterwards. So if you missed the beginning and you're curious to know what we talked about, you'll be able to find that later. All right, thank you all so much for your participation. I'll go ahead and show how you all responded. So it does look like a lot of you have pretty good confidence. So that's obviously it's great to see. And thank you all for participating in the poll. All right, without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce to you all Dr. John Spink. Since 2013, Dr. Spink has been the director of the Food Fraud Prevention Academy at MSU, Michigan State University. His early research and industry engagement supported the foundation of food fraud prevention, including as a member of the GFSI Food Fraud Think Tank, which developed their first compliance requirements and also has as the lead author of the article Defining the Public Health Threat of Food Fraud, which is the most widely cited definition of the term. Also, the Food Fraud Prevention MOOC, the free massive open online courses, are one of the most common training resources. And Dr. Spink, thank you so much for joining us again. It's always great to have you on for a webinar. And I'm going to go ahead and give you control and you can go ahead and present away.
Okay, thank you. Just want to do a sound check. Everything okay with my sound?
Yep, sound and video.
Okay. Well, everybody, welcome. What a time we're living. So we're, 3, 6, 9 months, soon to be 12 months. March 11th was when we at Michigan State went online with our classes. So it's interesting to look at how we're changing our behaviors. Some behaviors won't change back. We're learning a lot. In some cases, COVID has been a change agent. In others, it's been more of an accelerant. And that's something I hear from like academia and things like online teaching, that it's really just accelerated some of the things that we're doing. So what we're going to do today is look at food fraud and specifically this COVID global update, but really a global update. And one thing that I pride myself on is every presentation is different. So we're talking with the organizers here. There's been some specific questions that have come up, and we're gonna address those in a pretty direct way here. So if you have any questions about us, Food Fraud Prevention Academy, there's our information, and foodfraudprevention.com is the website. So first off, if you know anything about me or us, research, education, and outreach. So us talking here is outreach. And already just on the discussion before we got started today, there's some insight that I picked up that I'm going to go back and look at a bit. That'll lead us to go into research, and then that's back into education, which is more formal, structured, and then back to outreach. And with outreach, a lot of the things that we do is to help try to take care of all of you. One is probably 5 years of my life went into updating this textbook. So if you're managing food fraud, this is a great resource. It's comprehensive, and there's a good resource to start all in one spot. And then our MOOCs, Massive Open Online Courses. We've been doing these since 2013. The content's always free for you, your suppliers, your employees, whoever. And there's a certificate of completion if you need it. We've got 4 main ones, which are the background, audit guides. Actually, with the audit guides for food fraud and food defense, a lot of the auditors use this as a way to learn about that and see the updates. The vulnerability assessment into something that's been really great for us is really getting more into organics area. And one was with the Organic Trade Association developing this MOOC. We have a new enterprise risk management MOOC that probably is today that it's going up live. So you're getting the latest news, and that's broader Sarbanes-Oxley financial reporting, but specifically how it applies to food fraud, how we can use it. And then something I'll talk briefly about is two lectures that co-developed with USDA, and I was the presenter for those. And it was really fascinating to work with USDA officials and inspectors, certifiers, growers, producers to figure out some way to address this topic there. So that goes into a lot more detail on the criminology. So in general, we have a lot of other things that we do, but that's the basics for us in the background. So education and outreach, policy and strategy. Just real briefly about those two USDA courses. Again, free online. These were mainly developed for USDA inspectors. So if you're doing those USDA audits or helping companies be compliant, or you're going to get audited, they're pretty good ones to see. And there's the two of them there, September and October. So before getting started, it's always interesting to look at what we've talked about before. And I went back and looked at my previous PJR webinars, where the most recent one was food fraud, what you need to know. And that was May 2020. So that was right as we were in COVID and looking at that. Earlier though, December was looking at overall trends, and that was specifically looking at auditing. And the very first engagement where we were actually in the office down there in Troy was March 2018, looking at packaging specifically. So we're building upon those and then really giving a little bit more direct guidance to today. So start with this global update. So first off, obviously the pandemic, and nothing can be discussed without talking about the pandemic. Now, it's impacting some people a lot more than others. Well, I don't know, it sounds kind of obvious to say. So, no travel means we've all changed what we do. But for me, I'm still teaching classes. I'm still interacting with people. I'm still presenting to people. So in a lot of ways, a lot of things are the same. In some ways, it's a lot more efficient. Curbside pickup at grocery is very different. And this morning we were looking at an app and loading it for today, tomorrow, or the next day to pick up an order. A key is that new normal is just becoming normal. And that's something we need to keep looking at about the way that we do things like assessments and address food fraud. We've got less executive and management travel. So one thing I've seen is more reviews. So when your boss is not on the plane or traveling here and there in a different time zone, they're around a lot more. And sometimes they want to take a look at you or the business and they're digging in. So especially in the last couple months, we've seen companies take those like internal auditing resources and just doing a lot more. There's a lot more activity. So with food fraud, there's definitely an opportunity where the retailers, the food manufacturers, or others may start to look more closely at food fraud for you. So I think that's a big trend to pay attention to make sure to be ahead of it. One thing we had over this time period is GFSI was updated, and that was version 2020, obviously the year 2020. And really for food fraud, nothing changed. And really in some cases, there was 0 edits anywhere related to food fraud on a lot of things, which is good because what you've already got in place, you can just keep doing. You don't have to adjust it. And there's a great efficiency there. So one thing that is good is GFSI really worked hard to get it right at the start to set us on a direction. And being a part of that was really interesting because we knew that there was going to be a lot of evolution. If we made the requirements really too specific or prescriptive, then those would have to change over time. When we made them broad, more performance-based, then they're standing the test of time. So what you're already doing, you're probably just going to keep doing a little more of. Another thing that we see is demonstrate implementation. This is a natural growth. At the very beginning was do it, and then do it again, and now it's demonstrating the ongoing process, and for auditors specifically to convince them that you do have a system in place. You didn't just do it once, it's ongoing, and convince them to show them how to demonstrate implementation. That's something we'll cover a little bit more today. It's really building upon the concepts we've been talking about for the last 5 years. and then process improvement. And that's something to look at. I think with that is building upon to look at yourself. What do you have going on? Do internal reviews for yourself looking at, invite someone from another team in to look at it, especially if you have some internal auditors that can be a resource, or the external auditors. And now we're looking at multiple years of compliance. And to go back and look at what did the auditors actually say in those documents. Did 2 years ago, did they really do a thorough review of your food fraud system, or just a very high level? And are they getting more detailed? And really look at the details. Another key concept is executive level sign off. And what we saw early on, food fraud was just get it out, get it done. I don't know what it is, and the auditor's coming tomorrow, sign it. And now again, with managers, executives having a lot more time with no travel, fewer meetings, they're looking at the internal documents. This is a great time to really do that process review, to go back and look at what you're doing and get things under control. And really something we're seeing there is someone to say, now, wait a second, what did I sign? And that's getting us to look at these documents in more detail. And what are those documents? So just to review again, now the thing is that, remember, so there's many people I work with that have a lot of information about food fraud, but they don't have a good summary. And that's difficult, because if you're dealing with someone at the very high level, number one, you don't want to give them a lot of information that they can ask questions about, but you want to make it simple for them to be able to see and understand that there's a process in place and you're following it. So with the documents that are required, just to even have a one-page summary document, and look down here, can't really read that yet, but look on the left, the case study, corporate risk map, whatever it is, it's saying that there's a process here. Someone has done something and they've plotted it, that heat map, red, orange, yellow, green, blue. And people have gone through trying to figure out, where we are, what's our situation. So that's demonstrating implementation. It's showing that you have a process. And on the right, you can't really see that. That's not important, but it's a management system, a cycle, a process. And that's the food fraud prevention cycle, which is actually started as one of the articles that we researched and published in an academic journal. But that's something that's become a standard to really just have the work processes flow together. And this builds right upon those GFSI documents that were all the way back to the very beginning, being conduct a food fraud vulnerability assessment, at least annually. Now, some people did it once for the whole company, but only did piecemeal different items. You really need to do one for the whole company once a year. And that's really updating things. So why not have a one-page summary of that? That makes it real easy to explain what it is and what you've got going. And also that food fraud prevention strategy. Again, to have those be, do the summary of the one-page document. Now, if you could show that to your CEO, CFO, or even to an auditor, that may be enough to meet the requirements of what they're asking for. And a key being that the emphasis is that you have a process, it's in place, and it's ongoing. And this gives you a great deal of specific examples of a real document. Two others that we recommend that you do include are just a one-page summary of your food fraud prevention policy. That's basically where in your corporate policy do you get authority to work on this? Is it under consumer protection, food safety, quality management, wherever? And that's really important, because you might work on it and think it's important, but does your purchasing group, does your logistics group think it's important? And when you define it in terms of your policy, that really, no one can violate the corporate policy. They might misinterpret it, but they can't ignore it. And on the right, something that I think is really important, at least internally for yourself, is to have a review of your food fraud audit results. And as you saw before, things like first, second, third-party audits, government inspections or others, or customer reports, gather the information from those and put them in one spot. In 2 years, the people that come into your job aren't going to remember that there was this mayhem when food fraud started, and you didn't have anything in place, and you had to scurry to meet those requirements for whoever it was. But when you have it documented, it reminds people this is something we need to do, and we need to keep going about that. So those are good 4 spots, 4 things to look at, and it's good to go back to those at the very start of the year and look at what you have and make sure you have it. Then the food fraud prevention cycle. So this is something that, our challenge was that there was so much information and people didn't know how to start, and they didn't know how to manage it. And frequently, when we start to look at food fraud systems, when they're going to be more formal and adopted at the corporate level, like a policy or reviewed high up, is 2 questions we get. Well, one is education. how are we going to educate our own people now and in the future? So that's one thing, like those MOOCs, free courses, webinars like this, but the MOOCs are specific courses designed to cover all the concepts. And the second is, what's the process? What's the management system? So that led us with a couple co-authors. Two were from Mars Foods, and another, Dr. Sherry Spire-Pero, was from our business college. So, looking at these internal controls, we started to try to organize the concepts. So you've got basic background disciplines, fundamental concepts, and really the application. We have to remind ourselves, the goal is not to just do an assessment or do a test. The goal is to protect your product, and that's the application as the guardian. So we connected all the concepts here of all the process steps, and it starts with information gathering, then it's looking at the fraud opportunity itself, then doing those assessments, and that's where GFSI comes in with those assessments, doing enterprise risk management and the risk rank. If you don't have a list of your top 10 problems, you can't say you're working on your top 10 problems. I think a lot of times people find some food fraud issue and they work on it, and it's not been prioritized, but here's a way that's there in the process. And then most important for some things we're talking about today when we're looking at auditing certification is those countermeasures. What are we doing to look at the system, and how do we judge how much is enough when we put something in place, such as like for COVID, when we're looking at pandemic-related supply chain disruptions. Always at the middle is the fraud opportunity. We need to keep figuring out why our company is vulnerable and why the bad guys see us as a target. And also then we can start to understand how the bad guys think to say, well, if with COVID related issues, we can start to anticipate where there might be some other types of these vulnerabilities. Then we look at things like the information itself. And then first is before the information is looking at that assessment. Initial screening and detailed assessments, these are right out of things like Sarbanes-Oxley or ISO 31000 risk management. There's a lot of resources there. If you're doing the assessment, you go to right to step 3, and there's resources there for you to understand what you're trying to do and what are those the work processes. And then when we look at information, we've got things like incidents, scanning, and public policy. And incidents are things that occur, that some type of fraud. Scanning is looking at changes. So, whether that's different suppliers you're using, changing landscape of whatever, is looking at the future. And public policy is a big deal. So if all of a sudden like the USDA now has their strengthening organic enforcement proposed rule, well, when that's in place, there's going to be a different public policy focus. There's going to be different things that those USDA inspectors are looking for. That is new information that feeds into looking at our fraud opportunity. And then finally, looking at countermeasures. And one is traceability. So if there's horse meat and beef, then yeah, we look at things like species tests. But a key is that there's a lot more to it than just that. But one thing is to look at traceability, to look at the history of our product, where it's been, where it's going, who's had ownership of it, who's touched it. Then investigation or audit. Two things there. One is investigation is after an incident, you go and investigate it to look at the details. What led there to be a system weakness that led to this fraud act occur, and who's involved? You'd sure like to stop buying from those suppliers if they're sloppy or committing fraud. And then audit. Audit is looking at your systems and processes to see if things like this prevention cycle is effectively implemented. That gives you insight on how you can refine your process. And of course, testing. The authenticity testing is always going to be the most complex and intense part of the entire process, but it is a part of the process. And we need all the rest of this to understand which test we should do, when we should do it, where we should do it. So this is just to step aside a little bit to look at the overall management system. These are the process steps. Now the management system is implementing this in an ongoing basis. And think of the way that you have a management system for quality or process control or HACCP. And that's where we're taking food fraud to the next level. The big recommendation for here at the beginning of the year is to do a gap analysis. And if you look at any of our work, we've got these listed. It'll be in the slides here. Is basically there's a couple of questions to ask at the very beginning. Now, if you're an executive, you can take these, do a screenshot of this, and just send it to your organization. Say, answer these questions and send it to me by tomorrow lunchtime or something. And if you're in your own organization, if you're in the food fraud group or food safety group, you can look at this and then start to see where you feel you really fit in. Well, we've got are a couple things to start. One is, have you conducted a food fraud vulnerability assessment? Yes or no? It's just fine to use yes or no questions at the very start here. We're just trying to get a scale, a scope of what's going on. So have you done an assessment, and is it documented? Is it written? A lot of people have an assessment, but they're not really confident in showing me that when I walk in. Next is, do they have a food fraud prevention strategy? And a lot of people say, yeah, we have a strategy, but oh no, it's not written. Well, that's not a strategy then, that's more of an aspiration. And then demonstrate implementation. This is something that's been more of a focus to show, prove to me that you do meet, show me meeting notes, just like you would for HACCP or any other types of meetings. And this executive level sign off is pretty key, because that shows that this document is not just an ad hoc minor activity. It's official, and your company has looked at it and said, this is a competent document. Minimally conduct an annual food fraud incident review. As I mentioned, a lot of people did one big one at the start, and they've only done incident reviews or the food fraud reviews if a product had a problem. You need to go back and look at your entire business. So have you done a vulnerability assessment update for your entire company in the last year? Do you have a method to review the incidents? And then people start to say, well, what's a method and what should I do? Well, those are all good questions to start. So you start with what are you doing, and then you can have discussions among your group whether you're doing enough and if there should be some more process control. These last two are the ones that are the toughest for people. Have you addressed all type of food fraud? Now, if you're a supplier quality assurance group, your role and responsibility is not to look at counterfeits in the marketplace, but to be fully GFSI compliant, your company does need to look at that. Because if a retailer, if a grocery store buys your food product, they need all your product to be saleable, to be legal. So just because you can say your ingredients are fine, but you have rampant stolen goods in the market, that's a problem for the people downstream. It's actually a problem for your company as well. So that's a real key. The GFSI was put in place to help your company and your suppliers and customers, but your company stay under good management control. So it's important. And if you're only supplier quality assurance, in your assessment, it's key that you identify clearly that the areas that you did cover and that you did not cover. That also is a focus here for address all products, from incoming goods all the way through to outgoing goods through to the consumer. Because again, if there's rampant stolen goods in the marketplace, that could lead to a global recall or FDA type recall, and that can be a problem. So here's the gap analysis. Go through that and look at it real quickly, and then share it to see if their manager agree with what you've said. It's a great place to start. So conduct a gap analysis is your call to action. Polling question 3.
Oh yeah, it's that time again. Let me go ahead and send that out to you all. And this one is, what is your primary compliance focus? And there's 5 options here. So again, just choose whichever is the primary or the most important to you. I'll wait until we've got some good audience participation, and then Dr. Spink can roll right along with the rest of his presentation. For those of you who might have joined us late, maybe you missed part of the earlier slides. If you'd like to download those or see the recording with the audio, those will both be available from PJRFSI.com, and the recording will be on our YouTube channel as well. All right, thank you all so much for participating in that poll. And it looks like far and away, I'm not that surprised, most people are focused on GFSI. So I'll hand things back to you, Dr. Spink, and you can take it away.
Sure, that's very common, especially when we're looking at it from this type of audience. Now, one thing that is interesting, Sarbanes-Oxley. I've been in meetings where VPs of big top 20 food companies said, "Oh, that's nice, John, but we don't do Sarbanes-Oxley." Well, if you're a public company in the U.S., it is required, it's not optional. And in one meeting, the chief compliance officer said, "Yeah, we do. We just don't show you those charts." So it got a little testy there for a while. But the key is that somewhere in your company, the people that own your company are doing these high-level assessments. I'd like to give you the confidence that when we put together these concepts, like to say an assessment is an initial screen or a detailed assessment, you might have never heard of something called an initial screen. That's in the Sarbanes-Oxley type assessments, in enterprise risk management, COSO managerial accounting practices. We're using their terminology and adjusting it, adapting it to food fraud. So we all here presenting want to give you the confidence that as you move forward with our recommendations, you're meeting not only this specific requirement, but many of those requirements as well. So COVID update. This is fascinating. And I teach Introduction to Supply Chain Management and Introduction to Procurement, and we talk a lot about COVID and what was the disruption and what are the responses, and it's really been fascinating to look at. And to start out from our presentation way back when in May, seems like eons ago, our recommendation back then was, there will be and there are massive supply chain disruptions. I think that was not an understatement. We stated what it was. We expected it to be this. Now, did we expect it to go for a year? No, but that was not unheard of. We did predict ongoing and future supply chain disruptions. So we were clear on that. So far we're 2 for 2. Assurance of supply is number one. That at the very beginning, remember, we're just trying to find enough product to get through. And a lot of people went from making 150 types of bread to 10. And so some ingredients had a lot more supply requirements than others. And the big problem at the very beginning was just finding enough product. Interesting now, specifically the plastics industry in the last 2 weeks, for like engineering polymers, the plastics that go into like auto parts or other durable goods, they're having a huge crunch and major price increases because everybody's starting up at the same time. So all these auto parts manufacturers that whittle down their inventory of finished goods and resin, and the manufacturers, the auto companies, they whittle down their inventory, and even then the plastic suppliers whittled down their inventory because there was this lack of demand. All of a sudden, when everybody wants to start up at the same time, it's not like the shelf is just waiting there because everyone's asking for this product at the same time. So we will probably see another resurgence of this assurance of supply as some specific type of industries start back up. That might not hit us so much in food because we've been, in more of a consistent supply. What we've said back then, and remind again, is don't forget, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act and Food Safety Modernization Act are still in effect. You're still required to provide safe and legal product. So key with that is still focusing on the legal regulatory requirements. They still include adulterated foods and misbranded foods. Just because you can't find enough chia seeds or sesame seeds to put on top of your sesame seed bread doesn't mean that's a problem for everybody. That also doesn't mean that you can't ignore the laws when you're looking for assurance of supply. So those are things that we covered in the past, and we were pretty good about our estimates then. And again, the call to action then, as it is now, conduct a gap analysis to keep looking at that. If we look at COVID, it's been interesting to go back and see how much we could have known. And so this was from a review we did, look at the headlines during a new year, and we looked at incident review back. This was before COVID came out. So we looked, January 14th was just a date that we had picked. And when you look at, so what we had found is that there was some awareness of this starting up around the world, but so a month early, 2 months early, could we have seen anything? Would we have seen any triggers if we looked? Well, New York Times, it was not on the front page. For a couple of dates, it was listed in the Asia Pacific and the health section of this new outbreak that was happening, but we've seen outbreaks before. And it was a concern, but it wasn't alarming when we look back. And so one thing we did see is that there was, saying that China was dealing with this mysterious pneumonia-like illness. And one thing that we did see, that they did to calibrate. Did we underestimate this? Well, they were saying, the calibration point for us was SARS, and SARS killed 800 people worldwide in 2 years. I think that might be one day in Michigan right now for what we've got. But that was the rule by which we were measuring something big that was happening. But there was starting to be this note that, I hope this pathogen is less harmful one, so it would not cause a major epidemic similar to SARS. It would be a nightmare for all of us. And that's one thing we have seen. This has been, a major disruption. But back there, even if we did do some of this horizon scanning about the incident, it would have been very difficult for us to predict this coming. And then it gets to our question of is COVID-19 a food fraud risk? Now, beyond COVID-19 itself, so that COVID-19 is making people sick. So COVID-19 isn't actually disruption. COVID-19 is creating other stresses on the system. And so we'll consider the results of these supply chain disruptions. It's important to separate this because we now are getting to more details of what might affect your specific business related to others. And the question is the vulnerability or hazard from COVID-19 related to this supply? Is there a disruption, supply chain disruption? One thing we want to emphasize again is remember that from FSMA, it says the hazard analysis must be written regardless of its outcome, including hazards that may be intentionally introduced for the purposes of economic gain. So as you start to see these disruptions like COVID, maybe it's curbside pickup, maybe it's a shift from one product to another, maybe it's the time that it takes for product to be out of refrigeration while it's being delivered or something like that. Those are hazards that need to be assessed. More broadly, if or how does the global supply chain disruption and economic disruption change business fraud risk? So we're drilling in here a little more closely to look at the specific types of risks. For a lot of businesses, they're buying from suppliers that they know and shorter supply chains, and they're still doing their quality testing. And so for a lot of companies, there has not been a big increase in the fraud opportunity. And that's really kind of surprising, we think, with all this mass disruption that it could be. But that's why we do the assessments themselves. And then it gets down to this idea of what should you do and how much is enough for your response. And what we're really reminding you here is that, even though we're in a crisis mode, just trying to maintain business continuity, the food safety and food regulatory requirements are still in place. You're still required to provide safe and legal product. So again, with this, just run it through, use your current processes, use your food fraud prevention systems, and look at those vulnerabilities, break them down from just COVID-19 in general to very specific actions. It might be shipments of sanitizer from a new supplier. It might be product that goes through a free trade zone, something like that. So those are the big picture concepts. But how do we look at those? And how do we look at this pandemic now? But also, let's take notes to figure out if another pandemic is going to come or another wave, how would we address it? That leads us to, before the kind of final big push, the call to action slide is to review really if this pandemic is a black swan event or if it's reasonably foreseeable. And I don't know if you've heard of black swan events. Those are things that are so kind of unheard of, but monumental, that they change fundamentally the way that we look at all of our business. And the black swan event, what that came from is that originally the Europeans, Westerners, thought that all swans were white, until someone went to Australia and saw a black swan. Instantly, with one event, a black swan event, they realized that swans could be black as well. So it changed the fundamental view of everything at one point. So we're looking at to see if this pandemic, if a pandemic for now and in the future, is it a black swan event just unheard of, couldn't predict it, or is it reasonably foreseeable? This goes back to look at how we do things like our vulnerability assessments for food fraud. So our coronavirus outbreak is the most recent in a series that included at least 5 global events in the last 17 years. So 5 events in 17 years doesn't sound like a lot, but we're talking about 5 global events, major pandemic issues. So I guess we'd have to say that is something that it's not unheard of, because it's happened at least 5 times. MERS, Ebola. Well, I mean, that was something that we were all talking about for a while. That stayed very regional, fortunately. Avian influenza, remember that? That was one that there was a lot of concern that might really get here to the US and cause some problems. And then SARS, among others. And here's a list from the World Health Organization. And there was actually a publication in February 2018, 10 threats to global health overall. Number 1 was a pandemic influenza. So this is not unheard of. Now the question was, is that 800 deaths like SARS was? Is that count there, or are we talking 800,000, 8 million plus? And that's what was the scale was unheard of. But still, a pandemic was listed unknown as a threat early on. Maybe we didn't think of it. But I just thought this was interesting. Before getting the call to action, the report stated another influenza pandemic is inevitable. So let's look at the likelihood and consequence. The likelihood of a pandemic happening, inevitable. That's not 0. That's somewhat. Now the question is over what time period. Now think between now that we know about about COVID is what would happen in the future. But the key is that likelihood compared to the consequence. And that's where you need to dig into your food fraud responses or the incidents, the vulnerabilities you have to see if it is a real system weakness for you. And in this interconnected world, the next global flu is a matter of when, not if. With far-reaching consequences, severe pandemic could result in millions of deaths and destroy over 1% of global GDP. So COVID is by far beyond that, blew by it. The basic idea of a pandemic was not unheard of. So that's something that we can include in our overall food fraud vulnerability as a vulnerability, system weakness, to say, shortage of product, the ability to need to buy from, within a borders, things like that. So there is some things to be learned from this incident. Now what for food fraud prevention? So we talked about all these general concepts. Being a good academic, I go 10,000 feet and talk about the theory in the ivory tower. But fortunately for you, I think I'll drill down to some real details. Basically, this call to action, what to do. And at the very beginning, it's be simple and focus on the basics. So if you do have that food fraud vulnerability assessment in place, if you're putting that management system in place and starting to look at how you manage your work processes, then hopefully early on you would have dug into this to see where there were those supply chain disruptions and which ones did have a fraud opportunity. And if you put the plans in place, then you would be already looking, say it's chia seeds that you're buying or sesame seeds, you would put into place some monitoring early on. And that's where we say first to focus on the basics. Focus on standard operating procedures, whether it's something from COVID-19 or weather or a new product or market supply and demand. Focus on your standard operating procedures. Following that management system helps you to go through and have a methodical approach to look at the ever-changing market. Focus on your management system. So I've said it about 10 times now. And so the food fraud prevention cycle is a great way to identify those 6 steps and then the sub-functions under there. And when you focus on that, you're focusing on the details, standard operating procedures, being simple as you're moving forward. So I then ask for yourself, building upon that gap analysis, do you have a management system? Or on a scale of 1 to 10, how robust or mature do you think your management system for food fraud prevention is compared to food safety, quality, or others? Standard operating procedures. So do you have this for food fraud? Right now, if we were meeting live, could you pull up on your screen a list and show me standard operating procedures for managing food fraud, for doing incident reviews, for entering data, for communicating in a crisis? Well, that's something that is one more step to really formalizing what you're doing, making things easier for you. And really be simple and focus on the basics. But what is this? What does that even mean? And that's back to having standard operating procedures. What do you do to go search for new vulnerabilities in your business? And if you had that, then you would have been back on January 14th, as I showed early on. You would have been starting to look at these issues and to say, is this a problem yet? Well, you'd identify this weird new outbreak, illness, pneumonia-like flu, and maybe then you'd also looked at it in February and in March. And maybe there in March you would have made some decisions and changed your business operations a little quicker. That's why this system is so key. It does not need to be big and intense, but it's like riding a bike. Once you learn how to do it, it can be very simple. So the real 2 call to actions here, to kind of go back and hit you on the head with that again, is really to conduct a gap analysis. That's the base work processes, to go back and just see if you've got those in place, and then maybe it's starting to judge how thorough you are, and if you need to go in a little bit more detail. And then also update your incident review and your food fraud vulnerability assessment. We're here at the beginning of the year. I think I do this presentation 20 times at the beginning of every year, reminding people you have to do it annually, and you really want to do it annually. It's best for your business if you do it annually, to step back, look at all type of vulnerabilities and review them. And the goal then is that you find melamine before it's a problem. You identify horse meat and beef or species swapping before it's a problem. You can put plans in place. And then maybe with the pandemic, you would have seen things like assurance of supply. And you might have then been in March authorizing new suppliers to move forward. So with that, we'll open up for a discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Spink. I actually do have a quick polling question before we get into the Q&A. And let me just launch that question here. All right, there we go. And that just has to do with what possible future webinar topics you might like to see us cover. So I know we have a huge list coming up. Paul, did you want to talk about any of those while the poll is going on?
Sure. Amy, did you want to share the screen on that or
I
no?
have to leave the poll open as it is. So if you can just
Okay,
talk about
no
the.
worries. Sure. We have one coming up next Thursday, the 9th at 2 p.m., and it is on environmental monitoring to swab or not to swab. I'm very excited to welcome a close colleague of mine, Melanie Newman, who's the Executive VP and General Counsel for Matrix Sciences, as well as Dr. Martin Weidman. He's the professor at Cornell University, and we're going to be looking at talking about environmental monitoring. And then as you can see, the week after, we have one with BRCGS on ethical trade and responsible sourcing. And the next one is with Neil Marshall, who many of you may know as a former executive at Coca-Cola for many, many years, as well as a colleague of his and the information officer for Agrino, Giannis Stoitis. So that should be a very good one. We're going to be looking at effectively communicating all risks throughout your business. And we're looking at it of a lens through from the shop floor right to the executive boardroom. So I think that will all be great. And this is just 3 of our upcoming ones. You can see the webinar link at the bottom there. And I think we have about another 25 that are planned between now and June.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to give you a far scope into the future when we have them packed so closely together. One downside to being busy. All right, so let's get into the Q&A. I do have the contact information both for Paul and John on the screen. So if you have any questions that maybe you think of after the broadcast has ended, or if there's something more detailed, more specific to your company's individual situation, maybe you don't want to get into the full details on a public broadcast, here's the contact information on your screen, so please feel free to reach out. So let me open up this questions tab. It looks like we have one question here from Rajesh, and I do apologize if I pronounce any names incorrectly. Rajesh asks, as many audits are being delayed by COVID, there are some suppliers that are slow at receiving an extension letter from their certification body or are providing their own email confirmation indicating the delay due to COVID. How will this be looked at by our own auditors? Is it perhaps a minor nonconformance despite the fact that we have a full FFVA in place?
I don't think that's for me.
Yeah, Paul, do you have any input on this one for if there's a delay because of a supplier not being
Can you just read that one more time, Amy? Just so I'm
yeah,
clear.
no worries. And since audits are being delayed by COVID and suppliers are slow at receiving extension letters from their own CBs, would this possibly be a minor nonconformance from a GFSI auditor, even though a company might have a full FFVA in place?
Yeah, it could potentially be. It really, it depends on the auditor. What I would suggest is that if you're finding there's significant delays happening because of inability, or sorry, not inability, but inavailability of auditors or issues with your CB, then I would suggest going directly to the scheme owner themselves and have a discussion with them that you're having some issues, and they'll make sure to take care of that straight away. We, for the most part, wherever possible, have been doing a great deal of audits virtually. I think we hit the 1,200 mark since last February this month. So wherever and whenever possible, we're doing it virtually, and that's allowing us a lot more time to get through a great number of audits. But there are some schemes that do require you to be only partially virtual or not virtual at all in some cases. But happy to discuss that. My contact details are there. Feel free to reach out at any time.
All right, thank you, Paul. We've got a question here from Benjamin. Benjamin is asking, what are some major fraud hazards to grain at the farm level?
Well, one thing I could tell you is one of the there's been quite a few very public organic incidents where a producer, a farmer is claiming something's organic when it's not. And one of the big ones was $140 million of fraud there. So really, there's a lot of that with the claims, and then that can lead to even, basically is that crop handled in the right way. So it's interesting when you start to look at things all the way back. Now, partially also farmers can be victims of fraud where they think they're buying a fertilizer that meets a lot of requirements. That was another organic issue out in the Salinas Valley, California, where they thought they were buying intended to buy this product that was approved chemicals, and it ended up that the distributor was blending in some industrial chemicals that were not approved. It was to increase some flow rate through some of the piping. So the big key is each person to look at, well, at least to start to look at your vulnerability assessment and ask some questions. And when you start to look at it, usually some vulnerabilities come up. Now, they might not be a big concern, but at least you start to identify them. And a lot of times we find something that's been unheard of, like something that's unheard of for or unexpected for a lot of food manufacturers is their disposal of off-spec product. So let's say you make canned beans and you have product where the printing's off, so it's misbranded by FDA standards, Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. Throw them in your dumpster. That's great. Well, what if someone pulls them out of the dumpster and then resells them? And that has happened before. And all of a sudden, then in the marketplace is product that is misbranded, and that lot then becomes unfit for commerce, and the entire lot gets recalled, not just the 3 cases that were thrown away. And in that case, then looking at destruction of off-spec product is something that's been a concern. Another is like if that product was sent to like a pig farm to feed the pigs, you don't want to have food waste, or it goes to places like a food pantry or something, a food kitchen, then you're trying to do the right things, but that could lead that product to get into the marketplace. So we identify sometimes where there's product that's either off spec, it's unfit for production or for consumption, or like the printing's off, that could lead to some problems. So back to the basic is just start to ask those questions and look for potential incidents, and you can usually find some of those vulnerabilities.
Excellent, thank you so much. Let's see, we've got a question here from Mike. Mike says, as a retailer, I'm interested in what products might be most vulnerable to fraud. I'm thinking of olive oil, honey, etc. Any others?
Yeah, well, that's a tough question because we naturally think about a lot of the products like in a retailer by product groups, but a really important way to look at it is by your supply. So you could buy the most fraudulent product in the world from the most fraudulent country in the world, but if you buy from someone that's a reputable supplier, say a Fortune 500 food producer, then they're going to have processes in place. So buying from that GFSI certified, that you've audited them, you do quality control checks, then that supplier is probably going to be okay. It's then the people that you're not looking at, where a lot of times there can be some more vulnerabilities that you're unaware of. Kind of the 80-20 rule, where 80% is just fine and 20% of your products or suppliers cause your problems. But I realize that's very unsatisfying from the question that you're asking, what type of products should you be worried about? And really the big key is in general, products that have some type of claim and where that claim is a premium price. That's where there's an inherent fraud opportunity. So take that, say again, like organic versus conventional, or like Manuka honey versus a basic honey or something. Then you look at the price premium there. But also another factor is deceiving the customers. So if there's a product that you can't taste the difference between the premium and the standard, let's say a $5,000 bottle of wine versus a $500 bottle of wine. You're not talking about slop. But could you really tell the difference between a $5,000 bottle and a $500 bottle? So that's where there's your difficulties in detection for you as a consumer, and so those combine with just basic oversight of your suppliers. And if your suppliers are compliant and up to date on things like GFSI, then there's a higher level of concern. But bottom line is those higher priced products where there's a difference between the basics, and then where there's difficulty in detection by consumers.
All right, thank you. It looks like we've got another question here from Rajesh. He's wondering if there are any common packaging frauds out there in the market because he has not seen too many. So are there any notable ones that have happened in the past?
Yeah, packaging is a big deal, and actually that was our first video is looking at the GFSI requirements. The thing is that we look at the supply chain. Let's say that you make cartons for a cereal. Then if you're the carton producer, you make those cartons to the demand of the food manufacturer. So you don't really have a lot of inventory on hand. So things like stolen goods are going to be tough for some. A counterfeiter is going to have a hard time just stealing the product you're sending them. Very short supply chain. But you need to analyze. That situation anyway. Now, so maybe it's not that product, but let's say that you're that food company. Well, maybe the dyes used, the ink, ink dye used on the printing might be all of a sudden not food grade. And all of a sudden, then there could be intentional, or it could be just an accidental act. But there's things to look at the details like that when there's some type of specification that you need for your product itself. Sometimes there's very high performance packaging, but a lot of times that packaging is very one-off, and it's manufactured just for your own specification. The bottom line with packaging is just do the assessments and start to look at where there have been problems before, and there might not be a lot of them.
All right, great. We've got a question from Benjamin again. What is the best method for detecting organics fraud? Does it have to be genetic or chemical testing, or is there something else?
The very first step is to do an overall vulnerability assessment, because you need to know with the specific type of product that you buy, how you buy it, how it's received, what you do with it, other types of tests that you do, where you have a vulnerability and where you don't. And fortunately in organics, there's a lot of information. And USDA's National Organic Program has amazing amounts of detail on like fraudulent documents, how to identify fraud. R2 courses will help you to really identify incidents that have occurred before. Then you can apply them to you. And again, it's like that proximity, that if you're buying from someone that produces a product to order for you, then there may be less of an opportunity as that product is in shipment for a problem. Now, when we're looking at organics, another part of it is to look at what your organic claim is. And if you're doing the national or the USDA National Organic Program for the USDA claim, there's a lot in there in the inspection about doing mass balance. So that's making sure that the supplier can produce as much product as they say they are. So if they can produce 1,000 pounds, but they sell 10,000 pounds, that would come up in a mass balance audit. And if there's been a thorough, competent inspection or audit, organic or audit, that would have reviewed the mass balance to see if the claims are correct. Another is traceability. And that's something too, that with the certification of being able to track that product all the way back to its source. And on top of that, then let's say that there is some unknowns, it goes through different types of brokers or something, that maybe you find with a specific product you have, the difference between conventional and organic is a species or some type of enzyme or a pesticide residue, some things like that. Then there's some other things you can put in place to check for yourself.
All right, awesome. It looks like that was the last question. And since we're right about at the time we were scheduled to end, perfect timing, I just wanted to ask, is there any parting words of wisdom you might have for the audience today, Dr. Spink?
I think to take the time to go back and just do that quick gap analysis, to just double check, it's a process check, just to see where you are, where you are from last year to this year. And part of that is then to make sure that you've got planned, if you haven't done it yet, to redo a vulnerability assessment for your entire company. It doesn't have to be long. It can be 2 hours to go through and look at it, but just that you do it to look at the big picture.
All right, fantastic. Thank you again so much for taking the time to join us again. We love having you on. And again, I hope we have you again in the future soon. Among our 30 upcoming webinars, whatever the number is, I'm sure you're busy with classes. Paul, any parting words before we sign off for the day?
Just thank you very much. Dr. John, as always, it's a pleasure. Amy, you did a wonderful job. Thank you, and appreciate everyone's time today.
All right, with that, I'm going to wrap things up for today. Thank you everyone for joining us for our first webinar of the year, and we hope to see you on a future webinar. Stay safe and stay healthy out there, everyone.
Thank you.